One way to save money and storage space when it comes to seasonal or holiday decor is to have decorations that are reversible. I purchased this throw pillow cover with a cute sweater-clad dachshund on it for use during the Christmas season, and now I'm going to paint some autumn leaves on the backside so I can also use it for fall. To paint my leaves, I'm going to be using a stencil I created with my Cricut machine, but if you don't have a Cricut, you can still create a stencil using freezer paper and your iron, which I will explain at the end of this video. You can also purchase some stencils, but the freezer paper iron method is a money-saving DIY option. Before you begin painting, you'll want to place some type of barrier inside of your pillow cover, because when you paint, the paint's going to go through the back side and onto the front side and completely ruin the design that you have on the front. So if you're cutting a stencil on your Cricut or your Silhouette machine and you're using that vinyl, when you peel that vinyl away, you'll be left over with the wax paper that you can stick in there, and you just want to have it waxy side up so that the paint can't leak through. And if you don't have a Cricut and you're using the freezer paper method, that also has a waxy side to it, so you can simply cut an extra piece of freezer paper and place it inside of the pillow cover, again, waxy side up so that the paint won't bleed through to the front of your pillow cover. So I've got my stencil with some transfer tape on top, and I'm just going to apply it to my pillow cover and then peel all the transfer tape away. Now when you're stenciling onto fabric, it's very important that you're pouncing up and down over your stencil. You never want to brush side to side. Brushing will cause the paint to bleed underneath your stencil. It can also cause your stencil to pull up. Stencil will stick well like on non-porous surfaces, but when you're dealing with fabric, it's very porous, and so if you were to brush to the side, you're probably going to catch your stencil and end up lifting it up. So you always want to be pouncing up and down over your stencil. For the big leaves, I'm going to be painting them in purple and burgundy, and I'm going to use the same brush for those leaves because those are colors that can blend well, and so I don't have to worry about changing out my paintbrush. But when I go to paint the smaller leaves, I'm going to be using orange and red, and so I'll want to use a new brush for that. So for these leaves, I've changed out my brush to a fresh one, so I'm going to be painting them orange, and then I'm going to add some red around the edges. Because the video is going so fast, it probably looks like I'm brushing from side to side, but I'm not. I'm always pouncing up and down, so just remember up and down like a stamping motion or pouncing motion. You'll probably find as you're painting, it kind of soaks more and more into the fabric, and so it might keep lightening up as it soaks in, so you might have to add several coats like I'm doing here. So my purple was pretty light when I finished, and I think it's gotten a little bit lighter, so I'm adding more purple and also more burgundy just to blend it. Okay, and now the most satisfying part, pulling up the stencil to reveal the design. Oh yes, I love it so much. So the orange leaves turned out great, but when I zoom in close on the burgundy leaves, you'll see that there's some bleeding, and I'm pretty sure I know why that happened. I had some red paint that I was using on some other fabric, and I was testing out adding fabric softener and water to that red paint to see if it would make the painted area a little bit softer on the fabric. And so because of adding that, I noticed my red paint was very watery compared to the purple and the orange paint that I was using. And so I think when I used that red paint to create my burgundy and it was so watery that it caused the purple paint and the burgundy to kind of bleed through the fabric. But I can really only tell when I zoom in on this. When I'm standing a few feet away from the pillow, I can't even tell. So I'm okay with it. Here's the pillow on my bed, and I'm super happy with it. And also, I'm just so excited to know that when Christmas time comes, all I have to do is flip my pillow around and I'm all ready to go. Okay, so like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, if you don't have a Cricut and you want to use freezer paper as a stencil, you can do that. You want to make sure you're getting freezer paper, not wax paper and not parchment paper. So you want your paper to be coated in wax. That's what's going to make it act as a stencil. Parchment paper is not coated in wax, it's coated in silicone, so you don't want parchment paper. So you might be thinking, well, if I want wax, why not wax paper? Well, the problem with wax paper is it's waxed on both sides, and so when you go to iron it, it's going to stick to your iron. Freezer paper, on the other hand, is only waxed on one side, and so that's what you're going to want. When using freezer paper, you're just going to trace your design onto the non-waxy side of the freezer paper and then cut your design out. You want to place your freezer paper stencil on the fabric so that the waxy side is facing down and touching the fabric. We're going to be placing an iron on top, and that's just to melt the wax of the freezer paper, and that's what's going to allow it to stick to the fabric. You'll probably notice when you place the freezer paper stencil on top of your fabric that it's curled, and that's because it's been in roll form for so long. So you'll just need to place your hand on top to flatten it out for when you go to iron it. When it's time to iron, you want to use a setting that does not use steam, so a setting like wool works well. Then you'll place your iron on top of the stencil and just let it sit for 5, maybe 6 seconds, and then you'll just move it to a new area, and then again let it sit for about 5 seconds. You don't want to rub back and forth. You just want to let it sit and then move it to a new area. Once you've got all areas of the stencil ironed down so that it's sticking to the fabric, then you're ready to paint just like you would with a stencil from vinyl. Again, you'll just pounce up and down, and then when you're all done, you'll just peel the stencil away from the fabric.